What's up, everyone? I just got done doing a lot of work on my Q1. This one here is actually my son's. But basically, a couple weeks ago I was riding and my rear fender sheared off right here. So the hole from this part back just was loose, and I had some LED strips on there, so it was kind of tied on. So I had to do something about that. So that's kind of what started me working on it. Also, my rear tire was pretty smooth. It was time to change my rear tire, so I did that as well, which means taking the rim apart. So, I did all this on video, just some quick steps on if you ever need to remove your front or rear tire to change the tire, and just other things. So anyway, I just finished up on my scooter, and here's what it looks like. So I did everything in a metallic purple paint that I found. Came out pretty good, I think. Accent on my mirror, the accessory bars. I think it came out pretty good. And then the rims, I changed it. I had those red previously. They're just now kind of like a darker, not a black, but kind of a grayish metallic finish to those as well. And then there's that fender. That's what I ended up doing with my rear fender. It's more just like a little splash guard. Just thought I'd leave it on there for a little protection. It would keep your foot from going out into the motor at least while you're riding. If you want to see more information on exactly what I did and how I did it, removing the wheels, removing the tires and such, putting them back on, then you can watch further on. Basically, that's what prompted all this. I figured I would just get rid of this chunk of fender, even though I had some LED strips under it. Those were okay. Those made it out okay. I'm going to go relocate those probably underneath the scooter. But I figured I'd just get rid of this whole chunk. The other thing too is I need to replace my rear tire. Again, this is the second time I've worn a tire down. So like I said, I think this particular tire, and you can see it's worn smooth in the middle. I think this tire has about 800 miles on it. Just to show you, here's a new tire. And you can see it's brand new tread on that one compared to worn smooth in the middle here. Time to replace the tire too, so that's what this is about. Doing something with my fender, or lack thereof fender, and replacing the rear tire. By the way, if you ever need tires like this, don't buy them from Kiwa. I got these off Alibaba. You can just go on Alibaba, you'll find these tires all over the place. Just put in 10-inch pneumatic tire for scooter and you'll find them. You can literally get four tires and tubes for what you would pay for two on Kiwa. Alibaba.com, that's where I got those. So I've already started here. We removed my rear wheel. I've taken the rim apart to get the tire off. Anyway, so I got the rear wheel off, rear tire off. Basically what I did with my fender, this was the piece that was broken off, the other third piece of the fender. So it was actually broke right along this edge here. I smoothed that edge out, and just flipped it around. So this edge, which looks like a nice finished edge, used to be the edge that was down here. So basically I flipped the broken piece over. So it's kind of just like a little, I don't know, shield or something like that. So I did that, painted it purple, has this nice metallic purple paint. Next thing I did is, again, I took my wheel apart to get the tire off. So your tire would be right here. And of course with your tube in it, and it would be mounted on here. So the first thing you would need to do is take out your 6 screws that hold your brake rotor on, and then just kind of remove it, slide it down the motor wire. Now you don't have to disconnect your motor wires. There's really no need to do that. Okay, the next thing you need to do, there's a rim that's held in by 6 screws. And if you look on each side of the motor, it'll actually be the side with the wire coming out. But you'll see on one side, you'll see these 6 screws going down into there. Don't confuse them with this inner circle. These 6, that holds the casing of the motor together. So if you open that up, you get into the windings and the electronics of the motor. So the rim is a 2-piece rim. Once you take those screws out, you can then pull this part out of the tire. Now the tire will still be on the rim there, but this part of the rim will just slide out from the tire, and you can just pull that down to here. Now that you got those off, the tire will easily pull straight back off over this wire, just like this. Well, now that you have it off of the rim, it's very easy if you just take the rim, stand it on its edge, take the tire which is still on this wire, and just grab the wire and everything and place the tire over it like this. Okay, I actually got the tire now to make it look better. So the only difference now is the tire would still be on this wire, but you get the idea. You move the tire, position it over the rim this way. That's the only place it's holding the tire, right there on that edge, right there at that edge. Well, now you have you have pressure, force working with you, because you can just simply push down on both sides and easily push it past one side or the other. And once you get past one side, the whole tire will just come off very easily. Okay, so the other thing is I decided I'm going to change the color again. I found this purple now, this metallic purple paint. So what I did to clean my rim is I just used a spray bottle like this. Sprayed this down really good. You don't got to worry about getting water on this motor, is sealed. So that did a pretty good job for me. I'm still going to wipe it down with a wet rag just along this rim edge here, and then that's going to be good enough. Last thing I did is I took some Q-tips, dipped them in some isopropyl alcohol, and just went through with the Q-tips and wiped down like this rim on the inside there, and then each of these little grooves going around. Here's what I'm using. It's called Metal Cast, basically made to spray over chrome, but you can also use this base coat as a first coat. The rims, I'm going to paint this color here. So I got the back rim on this side done, let this dry overnight. Came out pretty good. So today I'm going to be flipping that over, doing the other side and the other part of the rim. I also finished this up yesterday, this front piece with my bar, and then I put the purple a little bit from the bottom of my graffiti there to the front steering part there. I'm going to leave this all black, leave this the way it is, and I'm going to paint this upper fork mount here, go back to black on that, purple on the springs, and then leave this black down here. And then of course my rim will be that color. All right, put a base coat of that silver down on the back of my mirror, and then the first coverage of the purple. And then also on my accessory bar for the handlebar. Pulled the front wheel off and took the tire off. Same process as the rear. There's the 6 screws that hold the rim together. Take those screws out. The rim comes apart 2 pieces, and then you can easily slide the tire and the tube off this way. My front tire still got plenty of tread on it, so I'm just going to reuse this. Back tire is the one that wears faster due to that's where the power is coming from the motor. Okay, going to remove my forks now so I can get the springs off to paint those. First got to take these 2 nuts on the top off. These are literally just caps. This fork is still threaded in through this piece, so this cap isn't really holding that on. It's just capping off the threads on the top. So, I mean, really, when you had your wheel on here, you really don't have to have those caps on even. They're serving no purpose other than to just cover up the top there. Because with your wheel mounted, obviously this couldn't unscrew, so there's no way this could come out or that could come out once your wheel's mounted. In fact, now to get this out, I've already removed one. We have to unthread this so this unscrews from the bottom. Now there's one thing here. There's these kind of like flat nuts on here. Let's take a look at this one. The silver piece right here. It's threaded on as well. So to get this off here now, you're going to need a special tool. I've got this crescent wrench here, and it's like a half crescent wrench. You'll notice it's very slim. The width of it is very small, which is what you need to grab this, because you've got the spring on one side and this metal piece on the other. You wouldn't be able to get a regular wrench on there, maybe some needle nose pliers or something, but you're going to need a lot of torque, especially if you've never had these off before. So basically what you do is you take your specialty wrench or whatever else you can find to get on there, and you can see that now fits in between the spring and that metal, so that can get on that nut and hold it good. Then you simply have to break the nut free, basically loosen it a little bit. You're going to end up having this nut here, wherever you have it adjusted for your spring tension, it's going to be tight up against the metal there. So the idea now is you need to break it loose from that a little bit, by unthreading it. so to speak. So it will back down the threads a little bit. Once you break that free, then you can unscrew this whole piece here. So I had to put the camera down to get a little more torque on this. Basically what I did, I held the handlebars up here with one hand, to keep this from moving. And then just had to use a lot of torque to spin this back. Now you can see I've broken it loose there. That's all I need to do. Now I can take my wrench off. And now that I've broken that loose with the wrench, I can just grab the fork down here and simply start unscrewing it. I've got a little thread sealer on there, so it might give me a little trouble. But you just keep unthreading it till it comes all the way out the bottom. Okay, so I've unthreaded that all the way out, and now I just have to tape up this black part because I'm not painting that. I'm just going to paint this red part here black. Next, I'm going to take my springs off here. To do that, again, these are simply nuts, so I need to now just unthread this nut all the way off the top, then I can slide my springs off. So I got this one off here. Now I can just simply slide my spring off. I'm just going to put that back on there. This cupped piece, or this round piece, goes down because that's going to go inside the spring. You can see that I'm holding this part here in the bottom steady, and this whole screw part will spin. So I didn't have a problem with this one. But on this other one here, when I start, I put my wrench on here, I start loosening this to take off the nut, the whole thing is spinning, the screw's spinning along with the nut, so I'm getting nowhere with it like that. I just sprayed some WD-40 down there, so I'm letting that soak in a little bit. And then the other thing too is that shaft goes inside of here and spins around on the inside, so there's nowhere you can really grab it good. I was able to grab that enough with my needle-nose vice grips with a towel wrapped around the threads, and I was able to hold it enough where I could then put my wrench on this part, this nut here, and then back it off so it's loosened now. So now I should just be able to unscrew that nut all the way off without a problem. Okay, so there's my two forks, got the springs off. Gonna paint those up now. One thing, if you ever take these off for any reason to paint them or whatever, I actually had to replace a couple of these, one on mine and one on my son's Q1, for actually being bent. We used to go over, jump off curbs and stuff, which we don't do anymore. I think that's what it eventually ended up bending the shaft in one each of our scoots. The other ones was fine. The left one was fine, the right one's bad. So I've had to replace these before. But if you ever have these off, just take a good look at them, hold them up, spin them around, make sure that they look straight. These you can get on Alibaba too, a lot cheaper than you can get them on Kiwa. So if you ever need to replace these things, they're way cheaper. I think I paid maybe 10, 12 bucks each, so maybe like 24, 25 bucks for the set instead of, I don't know, 80 or 90 or whatever Kiwa charges. So I got these rims cleaned off. Now I wanted to cover up my bearings so I don't paint those. So just put pieces of blue painter's tape on it and then took an X-Acto blade and cut around the edge of it. I got that first coat of the base coat on the springs and front rim. My accessory bar is done now, just gotta let it dry a little bit, looks good. And the back of my mirror as well. Yeah, you see the color a little bit better there. Okay, got the springs painted, putting it back on the forks. Already did that one there, but of course you just put the spring back over the center there, and then screw this nut on. Make sure this rounded part at the bottom goes down into the spring. So this is the top part, like that. Yeah, I screwed it down till I had 3/4 of an inch of the thread sticking up through the top here. So that's exactly from the base of this plate here to the top there. It's exactly 3/4 of an inch. That seems to be enough to me. Also, these are not identical. The forks are a little bit different. See, that one's just kind of not as big as this one because this one has the bracket for the caliper, the brake caliper. So here's the front of the scooter if I were standing on it. Left hand side, that's the one where the brake caliper mounting is going to go. So just be threading that up into there, and then the other one on the other side here, threading it back up into there till this plate meets the metal. Before threading these forks back onto the mount, hit these threads with some WD-40. Make it a lot easier. Okay, so just threading this on here, you can see the whole bolt and that nut's turning with it, which is going to close the gap there. I'm just going to keep turning this by hand. I'm just turning the fork down there until that nut meets the metal there and stops spinning. So right there, it's not spinning anymore. And then just tighten it up a little bit. No need to overdo it or anything. I just want to make sure it's snug up against the metal there by tightening it up a little bit. Okay, got the forks back on, and don't worry if it's what direction this is pointed. This one's correct. This part's going to go forward. This one's backwards right now. But once you have this all tight on here, you can spin this. Just put it somewhat lined up with the other one. You need to be able to move them for when you put the wheel on, so that's why those still move. I also painted these caps purple. And then of course I have my purple up here on my accessory bar, my light bar, a little bit of purple in there, and put a little purple on the back of the light. When I had it painted red before, I had some red overspray on the back, so really I just needed to cover that up with the purple. Front end's about done, just got to put the wheel back on. Going to give it another day for the paint to dry on the rim there, and then I'll throw the front wheel back together. Also the back wheel, back shocks, everything else I got off of it. Spring goes over the top, and this piece screws down on it, and there's one side that has, again, the round circle on the inside sticking down. That part would go into the spring like that. Basically you want to turn it down so it at least contacts the spring, and then tighten it a little bit more so it compresses a little bit, and at that point if you stop, that's going to be the loosest the suspension will be, meaning it'll be more springy. If you're heavier and that's too much, where maybe you want the suspension a little stiffer, then keep turning this nut down, which will compress the spring. The more compressed the spring is, the tighter the suspension will be. So only thing is, make sure they're both shocks are the same. You want them to be even. Everything's dried enough paint wise, so it's time to throw the wheels back together. Going to start with the front. So before putting this all back together, I want to just double check my bearings. So all I did is took the axle, put it back through the wheel, and then make sure it spins good. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to probably squirt some WD-40 down in there anyway, but if for some reason your wheel couldn't free spin like this, you'd probably need to replace your bearings. That would be rare, I would think, but possible. And I actually go over that process in a different video I did. First thing I'm going to do is put the rotor back onto the rim. You'll notice there's this arrow on the rotor that's going to be pointing the direction of the wheel rotation, so that's going to be pointing forward. We're just going to put that on this side of the rim. Can only go on the one side, of course. And just line it up with the holes. Go ahead and put in the 6 screws. So from this point on, this arrow on the rotor here pointing that way, that's going to be our indication for which way the tire is going to roll. So that's our forward rotation there. This rotor, the brakes are on the left, so this is going to be on the left hand side of the scooter. So it's going to be rolling that way, which is the direction that arrow is pointing. So if you look on the tires, somewhere along the edge you'll find a giant arrow and it says rotation. There you go. That's the way the tire should be faced, so when it's rolling forward, it's going like this, following the rotation of that. The tread pattern would be a little slightly different. I mean, if you put these tires on backwards, and I've done it before, I've just left them, because really the tread patterns, let's say if you're looking at it this way, you have like the long line and the short line coming off of there, versus this way. You know, it is a little bit, yeah, it's practically the same tread pattern either direction. So, but they put that on there for a reason, so it's best to put it on if you can, following the rotation arrow on the tire. Again, if you did it backwards, I wouldn't worry about even going through the trouble of reversing it. I've done that before early on and just left it on, and it didn't seem to really matter much to the scooter or the wear of the tire. Okay, so anyway, what I'm going to do now is flip this rim over. Rotation's going that way. So again, the arrow is pointing to my right as I lay this down here. And now we want to make sure the rotation arrow on this tire also points to that same direction to the right when I put it on the rim here. Now there's going to be a hole for your stem. That's the other important thing. At this point, with your tire facing, rotation facing to that direction, to the front, your stem, your valve stem, 90-degree stem should be facing you, pointing outwards. And it has to be in that way. I'm going to reuse my front tire because it's not worn down to the point where I think it needs to be changed yet. Here's a brand new one again. And there's still plenty of tread on my front tire. The rear tires wear more. So I'm going to reuse my front tire. So my inner tube and everything is already in there nice. If you have a new inner tube, I suggest you first, again, point the rotation arrow to your right, and then put the uninflated inner tube inside the tire with the stem pointing out towards you. And then get a pump, a hand pump or electric pump, whatever you have, and put just enough air in it so it's like mine here. You see, I've got air in my inner tube. It's not a lot of air, but it's enough to basically, if this was a new tube, it would open it up like this, so you don't so it's straight in the tire, and also you don't want to have any of it sticking out over this edge here, because we're going to put that down over the rim, so we want the inner tube to be out of the way when we put these two pieces together, so it doesn't get pinched in between the two. So just like this, get your inner tube in there, put some air in it, rotation arrow facing to the right, stem pointing up towards you, and put enough air in it where it's not passing the edge of the rubber of the tire, and that way it won't make contact with the rim while you're putting it together. Now at this point I have to find the hole in this part of the rim here. There it is down there, so leave that direction. So just as a last check here, I've got the tire sitting on there. I'm going to hold it and then flip it over. Make sure my rotation arrow, which is pointing down at this point, matches the rotation arrow on this side. So it's going counterclockwise. So they're both going the same direction. That's good. And now, as you can see, I've got my hole in the rim lined up with my stem. I've just got to work that, pull the side up, work the stem down through the hole, and then push the tire on this half of the rim. So it's pretty easy to get that through there. Basically, I just took the tire, removed it completely from the rim, pulled it this way enough where I could angle the top of the stem there through that hole. I've got the rim on the inside there. There's my inner tube. I want to make sure that no part of my inner tube is sticking out to get into the way of when the two pieces of the rim go together. Now it's just a matter of taking our outer rim, lining up the holes, dropping it down on top there, and then securing it with 6 screws. This is ready to be mounted back onto the scooter. I could air it up first. Probably a good idea in case you created a leak or something, which you shouldn't unless A, you had a bad tube to begin with, or B, you somehow pinched the inner tube between the two halves when you put it together. Again, if you just be careful when you put that tire on, put enough air in the inner tube where it's not sticking out beyond the side of the tire wall, you should be good with that. Okay, so I did air my tire up. I aired it up to 50 psi. That's where I pretty much ride at. If I want to get a little bit more speed, I'd take it up to 55 psi. You get about 2 miles per hour more on your top end for every 5 psi. I figured I'd go ahead and put my new inner tube in my rear tire. That way I can show you the process I just explained on the front tire. Same thing for the back. 10 by 2.5 for the tire, and 10 by 2 for the inner tube. First thing I want to do is get the rotation direction of the tire set properly, because I know then that the 90-degree valve stem will be facing out towards me. That's another thing. If you order these inner tubes, make sure you get ones that have a 90-degree angle, because there are some out there that have a different angle to them and they won't fit through these rims. So you got to have the 90-degree bend in it. So I'm going to basically install this inner tube inside the tire just like this, but I first need to figure out which way I need the stem to point. Looking at my rear motor right now, we can tell that the rotation is going to be clockwise, because this is the side that the rotor is going to mount onto. This ring is going to fit down over the tire, and then this rotor is going to mount back up to here. The brakes are on the right hand side on the rear, So therefore the rotor is going to be, it can only go on the one side, but you know that is the side that will drop down and then come back up to the caliper there. So your rotor is on the right hand side of the scooter, meaning the rotation is going to be clockwise as forward. So that's what we need to know now. First we'll go grab the tire. We'll go look for that rotation arrow on the side of the tire. There it is. And we want to make sure that when we put this tire on here, with the rotation arrow going clockwise. Okay, so our tire laying on top of the motor in the proper rotation way going clockwise. Now we have to locate that hole in the rim where the stem has to go through, and it's right there. Let's grab our inner tube, and you can see the hole there in the rim. The stem is going to have to hook. You can see a position I have it in. You're going to have to hook it down through the hole and then out the rim like that. So that's how it has to be. If you had this backwards, installed like this way, then obviously you're not going to be able to get that stem through there. So that's very important. Sometimes these inner tubes, if you buy them as a set with the tires, they come already stuffed inside the tire, but they don't have any idea which way you need the stem to go. So you always have to double check that. Don't assume that if the inner tube's already in the tire, that's the proper direction. Okay, so just stuff it in there as best as you can. Try not to kink it or anything. Just shove it in there first, and then once it's in there, it kind of will expand a little bit, and then plus once you put a little air in it, it's going to straighten itself out. Just make sure you don't have any twists in it, and make sure you're pointing your valve stem the right way, and you should be fine. Again, just so to double check this, if I flip the tire this way, there's my rotation going clockwise, so my stem will easily go on there when I put the tire on the rim. Seems pretty good to me, so I'm going to stop it there. Look across there, you can't see any of the inner tube sticking out past that point. If you do, just take your finger, push it in a little bit. We're going to leave that like that for now, and we'll put this on later. Okay, go put the front wheel back on. I previously had removed my caliper by taking the two screws out, so that's not in the way. I suggest you do that if you're removing and putting your wheel on. It makes it a lot easier, and then you can line up the caliper later. So you have your axle, and there's two spacers, a thicker one and a shorter one. Basically how you want to associate it is starting at the side that has the brakes on it. The axle goes through the fork, comes out the other side of the fork, through the smaller spacer, through the wheel, on the other side of the wheel, the larger spacer, back through the fork with the other cap on it. Okay, so I got about halfway through there. Again, I've got the axle going into the fork, coming out of the fork. There's that short spacer in between the fork and the rotor there. Then it's coming through the wheel, and here's the axle just at the other side. Now I need to take the larger spacer and put that in there before I push the axle through and out the hole on the other side. So there we go. And then lastly, I just put that other cap on this other end and tighten it up. I decided as I was putting this on that I wanted to do my end caps on my axle in this purple, so took that back off and I'm painting them right now. I'm going to need to let these dry overnight, so I'm going to move on to the back wheel right now and start reassembling the rear end. There's two sets of screws, and one is longer than the other for the shocks. So one of these came out of the top, one of these came out of the bottom, and you can see there. So the shorter of the screws are going to be for the top of the shocks. These longer ones go to the bottom. So I'm going to use these shorter screws to secure the shocks up on top. So I've got the top ends of the shocks mounted with the shorter of the two screw sets. Tightened it up. It's tightened as much as I'm going to. You should leave it so there's a little bit of, it's not just loosely flopping around, but you can move it. And that's because when you get everything together, and then the weight of the scooter on it, this stuff is going to want to shift. So after you get everything on the ground, the scooter on the ground, if you really want to, you could go tighten it up more. But to me, this is good. It's not going to come loose. These nuts have Teflon in them, that plastic. It's blue on this side, on this one. And that locks the nuts onto the threads. So it's like using the equivalent of using Loctite. So those nuts aren't going to come off. So now before mounting the back on here, I figure I'll go ahead and put my rear wheel back together with the tire and inner tube on it. I'm removing my rear caliper now just to get it up out of the way, get this cable out of the way while I'm doing the rear wheel. And anytime you remove the rear wheel, you're likely going to have to reposition this anyway. So there's just the 2 screws that hold it on, one here, and actually right now that brake cable is what's holding this whole swing arm up. So I'm going to remove that, and then the swing arm will just kind of like go down. Okay, so once I remove the caliper from there, now my swing arm is free. And that's another thing, if your swing arm doesn't move like this freely, then this is too tight right here on this pivot point right here. This is kind of like an axle for the pivot point of the rear motor mount. So at this point, your shocks, your springs are what's carrying the your weight. But I've seen these where these are too tight. This has like been mounted up here, and this thing's been cranked down so tight that this rear pivot arm won't move. Well, you've just disabled your suspension in that case. So this is supposed to move. You don't need to tighten this too tight. Again, it has Teflon in that nut. It's not going to back off by itself. And you can see how loose I have mine, so it just swings freely on its own. It doesn't move back and forth this way, it just swings up and down freely. The motor cable on the outside, the brake rotor on the right-hand side, because this is where the brake caliper is. So the rotor's got to be on the same side, obviously. So the motor's going to sit down into the scooter right here. So this is the outside where the rotor is. So that means the wheel, when it's rotating, is going to be going forward. We're sitting at the rear end of it right now, so the wheel will be rotating forward or clockwise. Notice we also have the hole in the rim here where the stem has to go through. So I'm going to take my tire, which we've previously installed the inner tube in, making sure to have that stem pointing the right way. And then on this side we have our stem, which will hook down through the hole there as we put the tire on. So now the tricky part is, because of the motor wire that goes into the axle there, we can't just simply slide this tire onto that side like that. So we're going to have to do it in reverse of the way we moved it. First, we're going to get our rotor out of the way, and this other half piece of the rim. We're going to move that down the cable here, and just try to get those as far out of the way as possible. So now we can use the hole for the stem in the rim, because we know we've pre-checked and we know that this is incorrectly, this inner tube. And we can see that this would have to go on this way. Basically, the tire needs to go on this way. But again, because of the motor wire there, we can't just put it on there. So what we're going to do, and this is going to make it a lot easier, turn the tire at this point so the valve is facing up. Take the tire, set it perpendicular to the rim. Here I got about halfway over. You can see the only place the tire's touching the rim is right there a little bit, right there a little bit. So you can use your weight and pressure to push the tire down or the top of the rim. Once it gets past halfway, it'll just slide right on. So you can see now, almost through. I've got this half of it through. Basically, it's just pushing it a little bit further down, popping the rim back up. Okay, so now I've got popped through there. It's on the correct side. Here's our lip. So this side's just going to go right up against the lip. I'm going to flip this over basically, but as I'm doing it, I have to align our 90-degree stem here to go through, hook through that hole and come out on this side. Okay, so now I got the tire on there with the stem coming through that hole nice and straight. I had to manipulate a little bit to give it room to get out of there. Okay, so now I'm just going to set it down on this side and line up that secondary rim piece. Managed to chip up my new paint a little bit, putting that rim on. I think it's from rubbing on this spring or something, but I can touch that up when I'm done. Down where you can see where the rim's going to mount on there, where those holes are, so you want to make sure your inner tube is not impeding on that metal ledge there where those holes are, because that's where your rim is going to be sitting on top of the other rim when we screw them down, and you don't want your inner tube to be pinched in between there. As you can see, we got plenty of clearance there. Lined up those holes with the holes in the other part of the rim. Set this other secondary rim on the top of it. Now it's just a matter of putting the 6 screws in. Put some air in it now. And then lastly, put the rotor back on here and screw it down. I'm going to touch up my paint though before I go any further. Okay, so I touched up my paint on my rear motor in here and went ahead and put my rotor back on. Secure it with these 6 screws, so that's all good. Put my 50 psi in my tire. So next thing I need to do is connect the 2 rear shocks into there and into there using the longer of the bolts. Again, the shorter ones go on the top, the longer ones go on the bottom. And I also went ahead and put my front wheel back on, and you can see I painted the end caps purple as well. Now before attaching this shock on the right hand side here, I want to make sure that my motor wire is going on this side, on the inside of the shock before I bolt that down there. You don't want the wire going on the outside, it should stick through on the inside. So now I've looped my motor cable so it goes to the inside of the shock, and now I can lift up my motor mount and connect those 2 shocks back in. Alright, so now I got the bottom of the shocks mounted into the swing arm. Both sides, tighten them up. Now again, don't over tighten those. They're not going to come off. They have that Teflon built into the nuts. So there's my rear swing arm. Next thing, I just have to keep my caliper out of the way, flip the motor around, and then lift it up into the spaces, making sure that these tabs on these lock washers that are on here. So basically this is going to go on the inside, then it's going to go through the fork, then this is going to be on the outside of the fork with this tab that will stick into here. So you can see that slot in the top there. So you have to make sure when you put this motor in, because this part won't spin, so you have to make sure that's pointing up when you lift it up into here. You could also, there's only 2 ways you could put it, but you could put it facing down, and then you wouldn't have, you wouldn't be able to put it in the slot here. All right, got the rear wheel mounted again. That's again my new modified fender since the old one broke off. That's why I'm going to leave it now. And actually I like the look of it with that tire sticking out by itself. Okay, got to throw my caliper back on and adjust the brakes real quick, and I'll be done with the back end. Another thing, if you're going to be removing your wheels or anything for that matter, your calipers or anything off the scooter, before you do that, take a look at what hardware is there and where it's positioned. Maybe take a picture with your phone or something so you have reference later. For example, looking at this side for my rear wheel, we've got on the outside the axle, the nut, that locking washer with the tab in it that goes into the fork. On the other side of the fork, if you look down inside there, you can see I've got 2 spacers or washers, and then the wheel. So right there, just a picture of that right there would tell me exactly, where everything goes when I'm putting it back together. Because it's important on the wheels, especially that you have the spacers in the same place as they were. For example, if I only had 1 spacer on the inside there, that would shift the rotor and everything to the right further, and then it's not going to line up with your caliper, and you're going to have a whole, different problem. So it's especially important, again, on the wheels that you get these spacers correct, whatever spacers are between the fork and the wheel on this side. Let's look at my other side, and you can see on this side, again, on the outside you have the nut, the locking washer that locks into that tab in the fork, then the fork, and then I have 1 washer or spacer on this side. The wheel kind of sticks out. There's a little hub there at the edge, so the washer's up against there. But I got 1 washer on this side, 2 on this side. So again, that's very important. If I got those all mixed up and I put 2 on this side and 1 on this side, the whole wheel would be shifted over, and that would be problems with your brakes, and you wouldn't be able to get your caliper on properly. So next I'm going to mount my caliper back up onto this bracket here with the 2 screws. Now if you notice the holes in the caliper itself, they're not exactly circular, they're kind of like oval, and that's so you can put the screws in and leave them loose, and then the caliper will be able to slide back and forth that way a little bit. Okay, I've got my caliper up here. I got the 2 screws in there, and basically what I did, I tightened them down till they were snug, just snug, and then I backed them off a couple of turns. So this is loose right now, and the reason for that again is since those holes in the caliper are kind of oval, there's play in it now. You can see it goes back and forth this way on both sides because I've got both screws slightly loose. And grab your rear brake lever and pull it, so you're basically activating the brake pads to close on the rotor, and then that's going to kind of almost self-align this caliper where it needs to be. So I'm going to do that now, and while you're holding it tight like that, keep holding it and then tighten down these bolts to hold us in that position where it's locked in with the brakes on. Okay, so got that tightened down good, and if I spin my rear wheel, I hear absolutely no rubbing. That's because I had these adjusted pretty good before. If you're to get some rubbing, a little bit of rubbing is not a big deal, but if you're getting it rubbing like in one spot, like when you spin it, you hear it like going every time around. You can look down in between here where your rotor goes between your brake pads there. You can see that there's my rotor in the middle, and you can see as I move the camera a little bit, the space on each side of the rotor. So if you spin your wheel and you hear it rubbing at some point, you can look inside there between the 2 brake pads and see if it's rubbing on the inside pad or on the outside pad. If we're rubbing on the outside pad, basically what you can do is you can put your finger right at the edge of the caliper there. The brake pads are a little bit further back, so you know the rubbing point would be, just behind where your finger is. Move your finger all the way down to here to get some open room. If it were rubbing on the outside pad, you could just take a rubber mallet and tap gently a little bit and do trial and error. A few times it might take you to get it, but you can usually straighten it out that way. If it's rubbing on the inside pad, you can just at that point take a pair of needle nose pliers, or actually I use a needle nose vice grips, works really good. Put it at that point and then just gently bend it back outward a little bit of, just do a little bit of time until you see how it goes, and then roll the tire again. You can usually get rid of those rubbing when it's rubbing on just one part of the rotor. All right, putting on the front caliper, same thing. I just bolted it back on to where it should be. Again, I've got them just to the point where they were snug, and then backed them off so it has that movement. Now I'm going to grab the front brake lever, pull it and hold it, which will activate the brake pads to hold it on the rotor. And then while I'm holding it tight, I'll tighten down these 2 screws. All right, got everything put back together. Last thing I need to do is put my LED bit strips back up. This one here is what used to be my tail light. I had it on the back fender before it broke off. I think I'm just going to wire that up right up here to the back part here up on top, and then I have 2 LED strips that I've cut off at this point, but they used to go up underneath my fender and around as well. I was able to save those. I'm going to just put those back up underneath the chassis facing down towards the ground. And I got my tail light up there. Just use that shoe glue stuff to hold it on, and I got it clamped on there to leave it on there overnight. Dry up good, and I've got my extra 2 strips down here. These are strips I had up here before. These used to be up under my fender, and now I just put them down underneath the chassis there. Since I have a new tire, new inner tube in here, I'm putting some of this flat out sealant in it. So this is the flat out. They have several versions. This one's called Sportsman Formula. And you can see there, works in tube or tubeless. Back together, everything came out good. Ride's good, I've ridden it already. And actually went 26 miles on it a couple nights ago. And everything went well. So, alright guys, till next time, take care, ride safe.